Alrighty, so we are going to be tackling not just Ben Shapiro, not just Tim Pool, but the two of them at once. They have decided to do a collaborative interview type deal, and I love suffering. So I'm here to suffer on your behalf. Take it away, Ben.
So why don't we talk first about sort of how you came to do what you're doing right now, and then we'll talk about how your political views were formed over time, because they do seem to move and evolve over time in a way that's really unique in the space. So first, I think that, to talk about, kind of...
So Ben Shapiro says that Tim Pool's political perspectives moving is very unique in the space. Every single political speaker that I know, discounting the right-wingers, have moved and shifted in the political space. So I don't think there's anything unique, even if we accept Tim Pool's politics shifting. All right, Benny, continue.
How you came to prominence in this space in the first place. My first experience seeing some of your stuff was during the Occupy Wall Street protest, when you were the only person who was out there actually taking footage and covering that stuff. But how did you get started in this area?
Well, it started with Occupy Wall Street.
Okay, so I'm just going to say this right now. Isn't it weird that Tim Pool is perfectly fine doing this interview in the way that he's doing it? Like, where he has an interview with somebody remotely? Because it seems to be he's not in the same studio as Ben, right? Wasn't there a point where Tim was saying that he couldn't do these kind of remote interviews? Because his setup wouldn't allow it or some shit? And then he just did it anyway? Seems that he only ever has that issue with left-wingers. Okay, sorry, Tim. Didn't mean to interrupt. Continue.
I had been doing nonprofit work. I've been hanging out with hackers, and this was back in like the days of Anonymous and some other hacker groups. And so the big core ideology behind what we did and why we did it, and it was mostly other people, I wasn't super active, was making sure people had access to information, be it get them the internet or give them the key details as to what's going on. And then all of a sudden you had these journalists say, well, that's journalism. You're sharing information. You're disseminating that stuff. So for me, I ended up on the East Coast. And then when I saw Occupy Wall Street happened, I was just I had just left California. I'm just some guy who's skateboarding and making videos. And I decided to go and start filming, eventually start live streaming. And while I'm streaming, I'm giving my thoughts on what's happening and essentially doing this raw live commentary. I had this big moment where I did a live stream for 22 hours straight. People were like running up to find me to give me batteries to keep it going. And then I started just covering conflict and crisis. From there, I went from some guy who's live streaming these protests to actually working for Vice. And I was the founding member of Vice News, the actual vertical, where I went on the ground to various countries, like Venezuela, like Turkey, Brazil, went to Egypt, watched the revolution happen. And I was just covering the conflict and crisis stuff there.
Which is very different than what he does right now. I'm going to let him continue, but what Tim largely does now is talk about other people's video. Basically does what I do, where he grabs videos or he grabs content that already exists and comments on that now. But I'm gonna go and let him continue. I'm just giving context.
Eventually, the conflict and crisis came to the U.S. So I ended up working for a company called Fusion. They started out trying to be like Vice, and this was at a time, this is 2014, when these companies all started getting super woke. I've never been particularly interested in, the weird cultural far left stuff. Even though I saw it at Occupy Wall Street, I was like, I think that's kind of ridiculous. So I ended up working with this company, but within 7 or 8 months,
I'm curious as to what kind of weird cultural left stuff he's talking about that he saw at Occupy Wall Street. I like it when this stuff is defined, but it is an interview, so he might not define it at all.
At a new editor-in-chief, all of a sudden, everything they're doing is woke. So they essentially put me in, what we call golden handcuffs. I was paid really...
Oh, okay. So he is going to at least give us that it's woke. Okay. That amorphous catch-all term like SJW.
Well to work for this, Disney company, but they didn't want to use real, on-the-ground conflict reporting because they wanted to do video segments about, woke stuff, I guess. But ultimately, my contract ended. I started doing my own YouTube channel, and I started by actually traveling around. So I went to Sweden, I did a 2-week like daily vlog from Sweden, interviewing people, seeing what was going on. This was when Donald Trump did that. There was that famous moment where he said, "Last night in Sweden, you see what happened," and the media went nuts. That was a crazy moment for me because all of a sudden I had my colleagues from Vice, who used to help me go to these countries, messaging me saying, "Don't go to Sweden to cover the story." And I was confused. Why wouldn't I? Like, I went to Egypt, I went to Ukraine, I went to a bunch of countries. No, but don't do this one. Trump's lying. And I'm like, I don't know anything about this. I don't know anything about Trump or what he's talking about. I just heard there are some claims about, refugees and crime. I'm going to go and investigate it. And they got really, really mad at me. And that was when I could see like this weird split starting to emerge. So from there, I come back to the U.S. and I started covering the conflicts we see on the ground in the U.S., Proud Boys, Antifa, that kind of stuff. And of course, what do I see? 99% of the time, you get some Trump supporters waving little American flags and Antifa shows up and attacks them.
Is that really how that happens? I'm curious. I'm actually genuinely curious. How often are Antifa the antagonizers? I'm curious if that's what we see. So we've got something from Vox here. We've got a Wikipedia article here. We've got stuff about police knowing far-right extremists knew there were threats to different protests. The stuff about how a right-wing troll demonized Antifa to the mainstream. I'm not seeing stuff about that, though. Not to say he's right or wrong. I'm just not seeing it. I wish I actually had, like, data. If somebody's got data in chat on this, I would love to see it. On how often Antifa are the antagonizers. We have data on how often BLM are the antagonizers, for instance, and it shows that largely, generally speaking, they're not. I'd like to see how often Antifa are. I have my suspicions, but I'll leave them until I've got numbers. Continue, Tim.
I would report it. Antifa would get really mad at me. So they started threatening me, doxing me. Someone posted a photo of my mom at one point. And so that was like, for me, I think I already had some, personal biases going back to my upbringing in Chicago. But now it's all I'm trying to do is cover what's happening on the ground. And by telling the truth, these extremists and like Antifa type people were attacking me and threatening me. And that, was kind of, I guess, to be expected. But it did set me off on a path where, for one, I couldn't actually go on the ground anymore. So I slowly stopped doing it because it was getting more and more dangerous. So then I started doing more and more news commentary and analysis to kind of make up for the fact that I couldn't be on the ground, aggregate more of the people who actually are doing the work. And I kind of feel like it's not a completely uncommon track for journalists to go from field reporter and then eventually later in their career, they find themselves as like a news commentary kind of person. And then once it just became completely obvious that, it happened when I went to Portland. I had some guy chasing me around, yelling, like, while I'm trying to film. And I'm like, okay, clearly I got, too many people know who I am. They're seeking me out. They're causing trouble. They're trolling, or they're actually attacking me. So I'm going to have to stop coming to a lot of these events and then just report to the best of my abilities from the desk. I just started increasing the amount of work I started doing.
I don't know if this is actually true. If it is true, then that does kind of suck for him. Granted, the stuff that he does behind the desk now, I have a huge freaking issue with. He tends to basically polarize everything incredibly right-wing while saying that he's a liberal. So, not a huge fan of that, what he does now. But if he did actually get attacked, it does make sense that would be why he would have stopped.
I started doing multiple segments per day. Now I think I do an hour and 45 minutes of direct commentary, and I do a total of I do an additional 2 hours of a live podcast show, which brings me to this position where now I'm kind of this, I think, as you mentioned, like a heterodox individual, don't really fit necessarily anywhere. Although I think I've been classified as like cultural right wing, whatever that means. But my political positions.
Dude, you just had an amorphous definition of left. And now that he says, oh, whatever cultural right wing means, now Ben Shapiro's smiling at that. Dude, the reason Ben gets happy about shit like that is because at the end of the day, Ben is culturally right-wing. If anybody needs a definition of that, cultural right-wing would be in favor of conservatism insofar as your like societal values are concerned, not necessarily your economic ones. You might want socialized healthcare and all that stuff, but like when it comes to the actual things that you advocate for, you might advocate for things that are a lot more conservative within society. So we're talking things like, maybe not so conservative to say segregation is an okay thing, but argue that, well, we're definitely not racist because we signed the Civil Rights Act or something. That's a position that I've seen conservatives take that has nothing to do with economics. These are loose definitions. He is right about that. But just as his usage of the word woke is incredibly loose, so is this.
Are kind of just like where Democrats used to be. It's a weird position to be in. I will say, I think the easiest way to explain that I'm not orthodox, I suppose, in some capacity, like I'm a heterodox personality, is whenever they try and smear people who are, you know, like right now, you got a lot of people on podcasts and YouTube, for instance, that are saying the election's not over. You get these articles saying, or CNN, for instance, you've got the right-wing media lying, claiming the election's not over, but they never mention me. Because if they do, they show you like, you know, my segments are actually fairly, I don't know, I don't want to say bland, but the joke is that I'm a milquetoast fence sitter. I will tell you, we have a sworn affidavit from numerous, you know, poll watchers, but I'm not going to come out and scream the election was stolen and Trump won. I'm just going to say we should investigate this. It doesn't really work very well for the mainstream media to.
Okay, but Tim, we already investigated it. Like, there's still lawsuits that are in there, but the election on the whole had already been investigated. It was investigated multiple times during the course of the election. So here's what happens with Tim Pool. Generally, he will take a position that seems very milquetoast, but it is coded specifically to favor one group of people, generally the right. He will go, I am a liberal. He does the Dave Rubin thing. I am a liberal, but I'm going to say things that are coded to the right. Somebody on the left is likely going to go, like what I'm doing right now, and point out, well, we've already done the investigation. Should we investigate? Yes, absolutely. And it's already largely been done. Whereas Tim is going to go, well, we should be doing the investigations. We should be doing it. It's several months after the election. It's all been done. There's only one type of person that kind of language is being used for. And it's not somebody on the left. Generally not.
To smear me as some kind of conspiracy theorist when I don't make an assertion beyond here's a fact. So ultimately, I find myself in this weird position where, for one, if you go to like my flagship channel with the most subscribers, it's like basically the media is trash and the Democrats are too. So then people see that and they say Tim Pool must be right wing. But then when it comes to actual policy, like my politics are probably, you know, independent center left, and I disagree with conservatives on a lot of core issues that result in Trump supporters getting mad at me.
But the thing is that when you are, and you just pointed out right now, Tim, when you are making the majority of your content to cater to a particular type of person, that's when we start arguing that it's a grift. You may not be right-wing. You may be politically center-left, like you said, and I am wholly willing to accept that you believe that, 110%. But when the majority of your content is made to cater to an audience that is right-wing, people are going to have to assume that you're either a secret right-winger or you are marginally on the left, but at the exact same time, you are also grifting. Because you are trying to signal to a very particular audience. An audience of whose views you do not espouse. Either of them, I'd argue, is not that great.
It's a weird position. I don't know. But ultimately, that's where I'm at now. And then I guess at some point, Ben Shapiro hit me up and asked me to come on his show. So,
yeah. So I want to talk with you about, you obviously were covering Antifa. You've covered in detail Black Lives Matter. And you mentioned sort of the woke phenomenon. I want to talk about the phenomenon. And then I want to talk about what I think is actually a more important issue, which is the meta phenomenon of how social media and the media refuse to cover this phenomenon. How they have decided that certain narratives are worth cultivating and certain narratives must be barred, certain narratives must be suppressed. Because to me, that is the scarier the scarier phenomenon is sort of the mainstream deciding what we can and cannot see. There's the radicals, and they're scary, but they're kind of a small proportion of the population. Then you actually have like this mainstream phenomenon of attempting to quash any discussion of the radicalism, which effectively makes them enablers. So let's talk about Antifa. So you covered Antifa on the ground. We've been told by the media that Antifa are...
I hope Ben has the exact same thought process when it comes to right-wing extremists. I don't know if he truly does or not, but I certainly hope he does.
Alternatively, World War II era Allied troops storming the beaches of Normandy. We've been told by Joe Biden that they are not, in fact, a group, that they are, in fact, just sort of a philosophy, sort of like...
True, they are. There's not an Antifa group. You can't get a membership card. You can't become Antifa. Antifa is largely the position of being anti-fascist.
Sort of like Cubism or something, like an artistic movement. What exactly is Antifa, since you've covered them on the ground?
It's it's not necessarily wrong to say that they're a movement or an idea, but it's the individual cells that we're talking about, I think what you're talking about. And what they do is...
Okay, there's a framing that happens here, and it needs to be considered. It needs to be talked about. So, if you're going to say there are individual cells of Antifa who do X, Y, and Z, that is a fair assessment. But when you do so, you cannot then say Antifa are doing X. Let me give you an example so maybe this makes sense as to why this particular kind of conversational tactic needs to be addressed. If there is a gang that happens to be primarily black and it exists in a black community, that is effectively a cell within a black community. And if that gang then goes and robs a store, I should be saying that that gang robbed a store. If I then report, though, black communities rob stores, I've effectively pulled the wool over your eyes and I've said a completely different thing. When I say Antifa attacked X, the statement reads as Antifa is a large group that did X. Antifa is an overarching thing and did X. It is not the same thing as being very specific about those cells. Largely, when Ben Shapiro and when Tim are talking about these things, they will do what they did right now and acknowledge that, yes, sure, these things are small groups of people within a larger idea, and when most people talk about Antifa, they're talking about the idea. But because of that, when you say things like Antifa did X, people view that as, oh, there's a larger group that did X. Just like if we're talking about Islam as a religion, or we're talking about Christianity as a religion, and an individual Christian or an individual Muslim does something, and then we say, the religion did X. It's a hasty generalization. Or rather, it is a purposeful hasty generalization on your part that causes other people to get and engage in a hasty generalization fallacy. That's kind of the problem, Tim. That's one of the reasons why people criticize you when you do that.
The mainstream media uses a semantic argument to try and act like they don't exist. So, to put it simply, Antifa is the symbols they use, the ideology. Typically, you'll find many of these people are authoritarian communists. And I'm not trying to exaggerate or do some stupid, oh, they're all communists. No, like they're literally, they believe in authoritarian communism.
Apparently, the majority of Antifa are authoritarian communists. Now, I'd say that these are tankies, right? These are people that literally want the world to turn into the USSR of old. Maybe, possibly, whatever amorphous definition that Tim wants to argue here. I have not generally met anyone who is anti-fascist. Oh, wow, I accidentally clicked ahead on the video because I'm moving with my pen. Sorry. But I've not really met anyone, and this is anecdotal, who's anti-fascist who also is authoritarian. Usually one of the reasons they became anti-fascist is because they do not like authoritarianism. And fascism tends to be incredibly authoritarian. And when I'm using the word fascism, I will actually define my words. When I'm using the word fascism, I'm talking about palingenetic ultranationalism. That happens to be very authoritarian. Hopefully I'm clicked on the right area.
We're talking about, I think, what you're talking about. And what they do is the mainstream media uses this to do some stupid, they're all communists. No, like they're literally, they believe in authoritarian communism. But it's rooted in
at least says authoritarian,
pre-World War II Germany, Weimar Germany, where you had the Communist Party had their anti-fasciste action, and it was challenging the fascists. They use the same symbols. They create small individual groups with, they say no leaders. They have leaders, they do. And then they coordinate.
Tim, please tell me the leader of Antifa. I would like my card. I would like my payment, please. That would be great.
For various actions, they call them nationwide. So ultimately what you have are political zealots who believe in the use of violence for political gain and terror for political gain. What they'll do is they'll tell you, and they'll have allies in media tell you, there's no such thing as Antifa. It's not a group. Well, that's a semantic manipulation. They're playing a game here.
So, a game not unlike the game that you play, when you argue that Antifa do X, while you're talking about individual cells, but the word game you're playing makes it seem like an entire group are doing things, right? That's not the word game. The word game is when the media is doing things, but not you, who, mind you, are also the media, just so you know. Irish Sweet also noted that Infrared is very much an Antifa tanky, so I'm not saying Antifa tankies don't exist. They obviously do and can exist. Pointing out that largely, I don't see them. They exist, definitely. There's no way they wouldn't exist. I just don't generally know them.
If I say Antifa came out in Portland and attacked people, I'm talking about Rose City Antifa. It's a legitimate group. They have membership. They have membership drives. They put out, flyers or they put out a website saying, here's how you join our group.
Okay, so that's different though, Tim. Because when you say Antifa did X, but you mean to say Rose City Antifa did X, these are two different statements that have completely different meanings conveyed to the audience. I do not know if this is deliberate, Tim, but it feels deliberate.
They have their own merchandise that says Rose City Antifa on it. So it would be like, the media is trying to use wordplay to trick you into believing that these various groups don't exist. Because if I said, I went to Portland and Antifa came out, then I went to Boston and Antifa came out, they say, aha, see, that proves it, because there's no connection between those two groups. But it's the general idea is they hold that same ideology. Ben is wearing all
so
black, they use similar
about
tactics,
this.
They use the same symbols, and they typically agree with each other on their cause and their means to the end. So you actually have a loose-knit group of various cells that coordinate with each other, using violence against their political opponents.
Wait, but you just snuck something in there. Everything you gave was an example of people who shared ideology, but then you said that they are close-knit and they coordinate with one another. Those are not the same things, Tim. It's not. I keep getting wonderful freeze frames of Ben Shapiro here, but Tim, thank you very much, Antipian Squid, for being a subscriber. Well, okay then. So, Tim, just as it is a manner of wordplay whenever you go Rose City Antifa and then say Antifa, you then say, well, Antifa did this and Antifa did this. It's another thing when you sneak in, these groups coordinate. Nothing you said so far argues that these groups coordinate. Your examples literally was that there were just two groups that happen to share a similar ideology. By this exact same argument, I could basically say that any right-wing extreme groups are all affiliated with one another, even if they're not.
For the most part, instigating it outright to win. And it works for them. The example I often give to people, why is it that social media is so willing to censor right-wing individuals, but Antifa is literally organizing violent riots online, even probably right now. They've been doing it, all year and for the past several years. And it's simple. Antifa in, say, San Francisco in the Bay Area, they'll show up to the headquarters of these big tech companies and they'll trash the place. So these companies say, well, leave them alone.
Really? Do you have evidence of that? Hold on. I'm curious, because that's a claim. Antifa trash San Francisco. Antifa thugs attack, but this is from Matt Christensen. You know what? We'll just... I'm curious. Before I even click on anything, I have a feeling that I know what I'm going to get. Rally point. Media bias. Fact check. Let's check rally point. Rally point. Wow. That's not what I expected to find there. Let's maybe try that. If it's Turning Point USA, I already know bullshit. It's a Daily Caller? Can't find anything for Rally Point. But a lot of this stuff is catered to ex-US military members. Those largely lean very conservative. But I want to see rate of factual checking. That's what I want to see. I mean, we've got Daily Caller here, but that's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for... Hold on. Let me see here. Rally... Nothing on Rally Point here. That's not what I'm looking for. It's bullshit from Daily Caller, Turning Point USA. No. That doesn't mean that it's TPUSA or Daily Caller. This means that we can't find it. We don't... Just because those are the things that come up in response to us doing the search, until we actually have stuff on Rally Point specifically, we cannot make a distinction here. Unless somebody's got experience with them already. I don't, though. This is... I don't know if this is an unreliable source. And I don't have time during this recording part to look up further than what I've already done. But no. This does not mean we cannot make a distinction yet. It means I do not know. Now, granted, there is a certain level of suspectness whenever I'm looking and I don't find something where that's concerned. But I don't know. I cannot... I'm not going to be the person that just goes, well, my gut feeling says this and that must be true. I argue against people like that all the freaking time. I don't know if this claim is true, and I do not know the context of this claim. And that is where I have to stand on that.
But there's not going to be a conservative group marching to Twitter HQ with pitchforks and torches.
Okay, but there are conservative groups that literally march to get freaking haircuts. Tim, that one was already a dishonest thing. You literally just said that people on the left will use violence and will bully media organizations, but people on the right won't do that. You don't see that. This is the stuff we're talking about, Tim, when we say that you are signaling to a particular kind of audience. This is it.
So long as big companies keep giving Antifa what they want or showing them their tactics work, they'll keep doing what they do. Now, as for the loose-knit nature of what they do, it's all on purpose. The reason why they don't have an official nationwide organization is it's actually really easy to understand when you look at the Proud Boys. Obviously, the Proud Boys and Antifa are not the same things, but there are similarities in that you have these groups that fight on the ground. The Proud Boys have a chairman, Enrique Tarrio. Well, they've banned him from dozens of banks. They've banned him from all these different platforms. You give someone a leader, they use that to actually try and discredit the rest of your group. Antifa knows this. I've actually talked to people going back to Occupy Wall Street who have straight up said...
Antifa knows... Again, you're speaking of Antifa as if it's a monolith, Tim. You're speaking out of two sides of your mouth. On one side of your mouth, you're saying that Antifa's an idea, but on the other side of your mouth, you're arguing that it is a monolith.
No leaders. As soon as you put someone up, they'll smear, they'll character assassinate. So it is on purpose they say they don't have leaders. However, law enforcement knows who the individual cell leaders are, I would imagine. And I think some of them got doxxed recently, so it's really, it's not their tactics aren't perfect, but I will say the left is much, much better at street level organizing than the right. And so you end up with a media narrative that can't understand what Antifa is or outright defends them on purpose. I think there's two things. You've got the activist media that hates Donald Trump, and they're saying, oh, Antifa's no big deal, but they're saying it because they want to protect Antifa. You then have these local reporters, these people who are probably, they have good intentions. They're trying to be objective and fair, but they can't grasp the concept of Antifa as a group because Antifa has specifically obfuscated what they really are. So you can't report on what they are. Then you
Could it possibly be that people understand that Antifa's more of an idea than a group, and that there do happen to be small groups of people that organize under that shared idea, but that still doesn't mean Antifa's a group? Tim, is it that you know the truth and everybody else is wrong? Or are you suffering from Dunning-Kruger right now? Which one is it?
Someone like, say, Andy No or Elijah Schaffer, someone like at one point what I was doing, and we can accurately break it down and report on the ground. They get really angry about that. And we all saw what happened to Andy No, when he was out there in Portland. They physically beat him. They left him bleeding and covered in, milkshake and stuff like that.
Dude, okay, so if we're talking about Andy No is one of the most dishonest reporters on the ground, period. Dude literally will get himself into situations specifically to tailor narratives in his favor. If you're going to use Andy No as your example, Tim, it's no wonder why people accuse you of being a right-wing grifter. None whatsoever. Andy No is not honest at all. I should probably actually do an entire video on the history of Andy No. That's a thing I should probably do. That's a future stream, everyone. That's a future one. Yo is claiming the IRA is after him now? Neat. Fuck that dude. Seriously, fuck that dude.
Those are the people they're really worried about. But long story short, they're radical far left. They typically are authoritarian communists, but not all of them. Some of them might just be... They might be like left anarchists. I know there's a big debate over whether or not anarchists can actually be left or right, but they view...
What? Okay, sure, whatever.
View themselves that way. They'll view themselves as socialists. But the big issue I see with Antifa is that you might find someone who will try and lie and justify, no, we don't believe in violence, it's self-defense. But these are the narratives they like to use to get away with what they do. And so long as you have these mainstream resistance-type Democrats who hate Trump, they won't call these groups out. And that's been something I've experienced going back to Occupy Wall Street, where the peaceful, legitimate protesters are told by these groups to respect their, quote, diversity of tactics. It's the stupidest idea I've ever heard.
Wait, diversity of tactics is the stupidest idea have you ever heard? Okay, so, Tim, I got a question. Let's say that I am doing 100 protests across the United States about a particular issue, and the issue does not get heard, there's no media coverage, nothing. The 100 protests have done absolutely nothing. But then in one of those protests, a single brick is thrown through a single window. Now the media is talking about all 101 protests. Diversity of tactics is now bad? Inarguably, the brick shouldn't have been thrown, but if we're talking about something like human rights, now we've got to wonder, wait, hold on. Is breaking a window in order to signal to people, hey, our human rights are being violated, as an example, this is a diversity of tactics. And there are people who will argue that that is a violent tactic. Is this suddenly something that needs to be completely and totally disowned? Or do we continue being ineffective? I'm not saying you should go out and commit violence. Don't. I am saying that when you're backed into a corner and nothing is working, then doing 100 more protests likely will not lead to the results you're looking for. If the protests are not being seen, are not being televised. There's a point in time where enough bad things have happened where those are the only options you've got left. Doesn't mean go out and do them. Doesn't mean go out and advocate for them. It doesn't mean to go out and start shit. it does mean that reality's messy and it blows ass. And if the world could be solved by 1,000 peaceful protests, if all the world's problems could be solved by that, then we wouldn't be in the shit situation we're in right now. Also, Tim's not going to bring citations into this because it's an interview. That tends to happen. There's nothing wrong with that. That's why I was looking things up as best I could.
The idea that you're going to engage in some kind of strategy against a big system, but diversify what that strategy is makes no sense. You want
Wait. A diverse Hold on, Tim. So let me get this straight. If Antifa, with groups of multiple individual cells who naturally would have individual strategies because they are not a whole group, that would be ineffective. It must be a single strategy, but if that single strategy is ineffective, that's ineffective. Tim, I don't think you know what strategy is. I don't think you understand how to strategize at all. What? That's just logically unsound. Like, that's not even a citation thing. That's literally just unsound fucking logic. Diversity of tactics. There are certain tactics that will work based on geography. There are certain tactics that will work based on the people you are influencing. There are certain tactics that will work based on the economic situation of the area you happen to be in. There are different situations that will happen based on the time of day. There are different tactics that need to be employed. A diversity of tactics, a diversity of strategy is perfectly acceptable and normal in any movement. How is that a stupid idea? The only reason you get to say it's a stupid idea is because you're talking to Ben Shapiro and his audience just heard the left gave stupid ideas, and they're going to run with it.
in the eye. You want to have a cohesive plan as to how you're going to make change happen. The reality is these groups say respect our diversity of tactics because that's code for getting violent and hurting people. And then you get these good-natured protesters who just want to, wave their little signs and banners and be heard, now standing back as Antifa messes with people, knocks them down, starts fires. So I will say, I think Antifa, for the most part, is a colloquial term we use to describe the far left extremists who use what's called the black bloc tactic, where, they wear hoodies, they wear masks. I don't know what we'll call them in the future. We just called them the black bloc anarchists, 10 years ago. Now they're Antifa. They're still here. They're still rioting. Apparently, the media calling it for Joe Biden did nothing to change their minds. And in fact, I think it's only likely to escalate as if we do enter a Joe Biden administration, because certainly Joe Biden won't be strong enough to deal with these groups that are pressuring him and attacking him. And
we are a Joe Biden administration. When was this recorded? April 11th is when it went up. When's your recording date for this? You didn't show the recording date for this. Dude, it is currently a What? I want to know when this was recorded, because this is a segment from an older recording, obviously. I want to know when this came up, because we're in a Biden administration. And every single time that Tim has argued that the violence is going to go up, the violence is going to go up, the violence is going to go up, it's currently going down. Tim's bad at predictions. But that's because he's not really making predictions. My opinion is that Tim is not really making predictions. Tim is saying the things that he thinks his conservative audience wants to hear that sounds like predictions. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. That's what I think it is. And I could be, again, completely wrong. Let me know in the comment section if you think I'm wrong. We only got 20 more seconds of the video. Let's go.
getting violent. And we already saw this, I believe, recently.
Thank you very much, Rockhawk, for the follow, by the way.
They attacked a DNC headquarters saying F Joe Biden. So anyway, there you go. I think I ranted too much on what Antifa is, but we can, follow up.
I hope you enjoyed that clip from the Ben Shapiro Show Sunday Special. If you did, go ahead and hit the subscribe.
Okay, cool. So that doesn't give us any information on when that was recorded. And we didn't get to hear that much from Ben. It was mostly just Tim talking about what Antifa is while demonstrating that he probably has an understanding of it, and then also saying what conservatives want to hear about it. Okay, sure. Why not? Why not, Tim? Why not? Hopefully some of the stuff that was covered in there made sense. Hopefully I was able to give at least a little bit of my perspective on Tim's thoughts and Tim's answers here. I know this wasn't exactly the normal kind of episode where we do a big debunk or anything like that. There's just a conversation here, and I wanted to be the, what is it, the fly on the wall in the conversation, as it were? Anywho, let me know what you think in the comment section below. As always, everyone, please consider supporting the channel if that's a thing that you have the wherewithal to do. Hit the like button if you haven't already. Subscribe if you haven't already. Follow if you're watching over on Twitch. Go to twitch.tv/NecroSuris if you have not already come over and followed over on Twitch. I am currently doing a push to partner. But as always, everyone, insert end of video tagline here.